Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the kind words. I'm truly happy to be here. And today, I'd like to discuss with you how we can future-proof our businesses, academia, our societies for the era of generative AI, which is now to come. But as the saying goes, those who don't remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And that's why I want to start 100 years ago. At the turn of the 20th century, the sign of great luxury and future was this: great, majestic ocean liners that were signs of just the prosperity, the power, and the technological advancement of the day. But soon after, these were all gone. They were swept away, not by an iceberg, not by a recession or war, but by this, the jet engine. But why? The companies behind these great ships, which disappeared, were in a perfect position. They knew and defined travel. They had the customers, and at the same time, they would have had access to airplanes. Why did they cease to exist? I think they simply defined their business too narrow and too short-minded. They thought of themselves as being in the transatlantic shipping business, when they could have actually thought of themselves as being transportation companies, irrespective of the particular means of transportation. In an era where it became all about faster, cheaper travel, they still thought of these majestic ships and make them ever more luxurious and ever faster, when the true advancement was order of magnitudes faster, something that ships could never reach. And so they tinkered with their individual ships rather than really embracing the transformation. And I guess there's a lesson for us to learn today in the day and age of generative AI. Are we truly understanding the destiny of our work, the core and meaning of what we're doing with the eyes of generative AI? Do we understand how it can propel our businesses, augment them, rather than compete against this novel technology? Because generative AI is a powerful technology. It belongs to these enabling technologies, much like electricity or the personal computer. We are not producing electricity just because that would have any value in itself, but because it becomes the enabler of millions of other technologies built upon that. And the same holds true for generative AI as well. And with that, it changes the business behind it. With that, there's a lot of prospected value in generative AI. It's projected that the annual additional value created by generative AI is roughly on the order of the GDP of Germany in its entirety. But where does this extra value actually come from before we're looking into what this means for the future? Well, I think the generative AI is becoming kind of an afterburner for our personal computers. Personal computers have been super versatile, but they have one limitation. When you want them to do something that nobody so far has designed them for, you need to tell them in their language. You need to program them. And this is a tedious job. This is a job which is error-prone, and one which is very costly. But most important of all, there's only very few people that actually speak the language of the computer. Now, generative AI is changing all of that. With generative AI, the computer now starts to understand our language, and we can tell the computer in our language what to do. In short, the computer becomes much more accessible in the sense that it understands what we want, it understands what we know, what we don't know, and can then give us just what that would be. But since we're talking about generative AI, isn't that sort of a limitation? And what's the generative about Gen AI? Well, generative here, first off, amounts to the training of this technology. When you take such an AI model, you presented data, withhold part of it, and then it's supposed to generate the things that you were holding back. Do that with images or with text models. And the beauty of that is that new properties emerge. When my lab was building Stable Diffusion, we were filling a lot of images into this model, and soon after we learned that although we never taught the model about concepts of the world, it learned something like shadows there, reflections, and so on. So you see emergent properties coming out of these models. And that has a profound implication. That means that you can take a generative AI like Stable Diffusion not only to generate images, but the very representation that is learned to empower this generation of images is one that you then can also utilize for many other tasks, such as establishing correspondences between images or visual search, searching for something which you might want to be finding in images. And that is a very important part, because we spend roughly 20% of our time searching for information. Now, the true challenge was that so far, we could only search for things that had been carefully curated beforehand. Tabular data, for instance, and things along these lines. So somebody needs to prepare the data and spoon feed it to the computer. Now, generative AI is changing that. The computer is now able to access the much larger volume of unstructured data that is out there, and with that propel us from an information society, which is feeding on bulks of information, into a true knowledge society, because that, as John Naisbitt put it, is where we eventually are. Yeah? We're drowning in this information, but we're starving for the true knowledge underneath. Now, generative AI is revolutionizing a lot of different ways that we're actually dealing with a computer, and let me highlight just a few. It's revolutionizing development of software, for instance, or design and the like. And we've come a lot of sort of distance already. Started off with humble software engineering, where it's been mostly about implementation, a super tedious and error-prone job. Moved over the last 20 years of machine learning and data analytics, where data engineering and the like was like front and center, to an age now of generative AI. And now, everything is different. Now, rather than defining or implementing a solution or a learning algorithm, you merely describe the problem to the AI, go into a dialogue with that AI to have it then develop what you're looking for. There's a lot of work now which is necessary in checking the outcome, but in itself, the development process has changed into a stage where you need less programming and where the development becomes much more rapid. And that has a profound implication. These properties here match exactly the shortcomings and the abilities that our businesses here in the majority have. We have a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises who are not necessarily in the IT business, but they need just that. They don't have the resources for super advanced software development, but they have something else that other big companies typically don't have access to. And that is direct contact to customers and to their data. And now, this data actually becomes the fuel for generative AI, and the generative AI itself heals several of these issues that I pointed out beforehand, in that it can advance these softwares or propel these companies and propel them to get their business into a place where they can get safeguarded, very tailored solutions for their problems. Generative AI has shown in studies to not just allow us to do our work faster, but increase its quality and reduce the diversity in terms of the outcome quality between different teams. And there are novel developments that I want to spend a minute or so talking about. Novel developments in the field of AI. And the first one here being AI agents. Now, we've all come to use these tools, ChatGPT and image generation engines and the like. Systems that you pull out of your pocket when you need them and then you put them back again. Now, with AI agents, this is starting to change. The AI itself becomes ever deeper integrated in our everyday life. With that, it understands even better what we demand from it, what we need, what we don't have so far. And with that, it can provide us better services. It, however, also solves, in the reverse direction, a problem that many of the big companies have. And that is them looking for data, for new data and very interesting data to fine-tune and adjust their models. Now, that is something that I believe in our open societies we will have to discuss, what value we, and potentially price tag, we put to this data, what that means in terms of data privacy to us. But I just wanted to show you that this goes both ways, right? The customers have a particular benefit from this more advanced technology, but at the same time, there's also backward flow of information happening, which has quite some value to it. The second part are world models. Generative AI so far has been used to solve our problems, but with world models, they really enter the physical world. Robotics is one profound example where it's important not to just observe what's there, but to make predictions about what's going to happen in the future. And that's, in a nutshell, what world models are. Simulators of essentially the future based on what they've observed from the past, because other than that, with a latency, a robot would never be able to engage. The examples that we see in the field of generative AI over the last year or so that really moved in that direction are video synthesis models, where you take frames from the past and make predictions about the future. But when you look at these videos with all the beauty that they have, you notice a lot of glitches, and it kind of gives you an idea that the true challenges of predicting interactions in our world, that these true challenges are still a bit in the future. Interactions between a drug, for instance, disease, and the patient, where you actually apply it, or things as crazy as crash tests, which tell you that our world is stochastic in nature, and with that, very complicated to predict. Now, the AI developments that we've seen are fueled by commodities, and ideally those that can scale. And so it goes that architectures typically flourish if they can utilize scalable commodities, commodities that rapidly become much more accessible. In the past, this was data, and that was compute. There are some challenges to it, which I hear they are talked about in the sense that these models have grown at a staggering rate over the last couple of years. But whatever that is, it remains that a critical ability that we need to acquire here is the expertise in knowing how to actually scale up these models, utilize the commodities that are out there, and how to develop new AI architectures dealing with the very issues of scaling. And that now brings us to a point where we need to ask a question. Where we need to ask the question how we can strengthen ourselves, our AI literacy, and our sovereignty. Now, if we embrace that AI is becoming a key enabling technology, that it becomes ever more present, omnipresent in our lives, a booster of productivity, and the key factor to transform us from an information to a knowledge society, and if we then observe that others aren't sleeping, at the most prominent AI conferences these days, China has actually sort of taken over the rest of the world. Most contributions there are actually coming from China. And that brings us to the point where we truly should think about how we can shape the future where we want to go. Just saying no probably won't do it, because the others will probably move forward in the future anyhow. So we need to think how we can get the sovereignty that we want. And for that, I think it's first off, as we've seen with the ships beforehand, important that we rethink the way that we actually utilize this technology. Much like the transition from ship to plane propelled us to a new dimension, and with that required a different mindset to think about our businesses, so should we do with generative AI and rethink how we're dealing there. And lastly, we need to build up the critical experience here, expertise here, to actually then build upon. Because other than that, we become dependent. Now we ask ourselves, how do we actually get this going? And it turns out just thinking about AI, as we've seen with the shipping business beforehand, probably won't get you there. You need to get your hands on that to understand what it means to have a jet engine, that you can't just apply this to your ship and have it, I don't know, fly over the ocean. And for that very reason, the push of the ministry and the state here was in the direction of building an AI foundation model in and for Bavaria, with the purpose of not just having this AI foundation model, but in particular strengthening the AI ecosystem that we're having here, building up the critical expertise that I talked about beforehand, and shaping the mindset so that it is in line with this new technology. The ecosystem consisting of all players, and this model is supposed to be for all players. Academia and industry participating in that, going over into society and the whole administrative world, and building up a strong ecosystem. What we try to go for, what our goal here is going in the direction of a more holistic, a generalistic AI, one that has a lot of different capabilities. That is not just focused on just writing or just watching images, but that can go all the way to acting as well. And to do that at our values, to make sure that it is legally compliant, that we have an open technology, open important here, so that industry can build on what we have here and make this to a springboard, turn it into a springboard for developing new technology, and a transparent approach that people want to use because they understand the consequences of using this technology. There will be an open and a participative process in developing this model, one where we have regular calls involving the entire ecosystem, asking everybody to contribute their best in developing this model forward, assessing the outcome of these calls, and then having development process. There will be core contributors, core engineers, which make sure the integration is happening and it's not just a bunch of loose pieces, and evaluate everything here. We're not building a final application, but a generalistic foundation model that then a lot of people can build upon. And we don't want to replicate expertise that is already there, but utilize it and strengthen that in the course of that. And there are, luckily, a lot of resources that are already provided this year. Resources in terms of compute, big GPU compute cluster hardware being provided and set up this year, and in terms of personnel, core engineering capabilities that we are lacking, that research does not have access to, but which is very important to scale and propel us into this new sort of era that we actually need to go for. And resources and funding for the various actors who will be successful in these calls and develop the model into the future, and provide these resources to them so that they can then shape and give their best and bring it together. We will have core personnel making sure that the entire development process goes in the direction which is in sync with the different models, and that this multimodal model creates more than the sum of its parts. Much like when you're having a language model, you can say thousands words about a sunrise, but just seeing this very sunrise there is something where one image says more than 1,000 words. And with that, the question remains, should we do this? And aren't we at the end already of the development? But to that I say, we are probably in the field of generative AI where the car manufacturing industry was 100 years ago. When Ford with the Model T democratized the field of car manufacturing, made it accessible to the millions out there, and where we in Germany benefited from this technology for 100 years. This is just a starting point. We look back for, 2-3 years and say like, oh, what development this has been. But just think of where we were with cars 100 years back in the past and what happened afterwards. And with that, I'd like to close with what JFK said when he set another milestone for his country for the future. That I believe we should set sail on this new sea here of generative AI, because there is knowledge to be gained for all of us, and there are new rights to be won. And we need to make sure that these are won and this progress for prosperity is made for all the people. So with that, let me thank you for your attention.